Hello, this is 52 Weeks of Design Live, and today we are going live with Adrian Taylor of Hyde Park Mouldings, spelled with a U. Hi.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm great. How are you? It's so good to see you.
It's so good to see you. Though you're very small and very low.
Am I very small and very low? All right, I was trying to use this fancy contraption, but that might not work very well.
I like
How are you?
that position is amazing. It's always amazing when it's like high and right.
Yeah. Okay, that's better probably. How have you been?
Does this mean you have to stand? I don't mean to ruin your life.
No, it's great.
Standing is terrible. I can't even make myself sit on this sofa. I'm just on the ground. And how are you, my dear?
Good. Very up to all sorts of interesting things.
I know.
Are you? And you too. Are you away? Are you traveling or something?
Abroad.
You're abroad.
Abroad.
That sounds very important indeed. Are you visiting? Are you up in the Dales?
I am
somewhere?
in the Dales. I am definitely in the Dales.
Very nice.
Enjoying it, but it's feeling very autumnal. So my husband and I are having a bit of a sinker today because it's like the light's gone a little blue, and it's that time of year. But the good news is, where I am, it's cocktail.
Well, there you are, of course. That's right. I'm ready for that weather here too, to tell you the truth. It's time to get back to, serious thought, leave the summertime behind, all of that.
Oh, Adrian. Yeah.
Setting a good example for the kids.
You are, to anybody who doesn't know you, a total whirling dervish. You live, speak, breathe architecture, architectural details. You love travel. You're always doing something. You're very involved with the ICAA. You've just joined the New York's, no, it's the Landmarks, no, it's the New York.
Yeah, the Landmarks Conservancy.
And actually, I used to be on that board. Peg Green is like my hero. So like you're always doing things. How did you get to this path? Because you're everywhere and everything, and you're a bit of a polymath.
Well, thank you first of all for you're far too generous to say something like that. But how did I get to this point? I mean, it's a matter of having worked in this funny little field that I work in for more than half of my life, and as a result of that, I guess I've just always gained more and more interest in the related fields, and I try to, I've been trying to give as much back as I possibly can, and sometimes that comes at the expense of time that could be spent doing more personal pursuits, but it's all good. I mean, I really love what we do, and I'm happy and excited about everything we're involved in. So
how did you get directed onto this path?
There's no direct path to what we do. Like I was in a completely different industry as a young man. I was working in technology, and I was on a project that brought me to the East Coast from Washington State, where I grew up, and one of my vendors on that project that I worked with very closely for 4 years was engaged to the man that had brought Hyde Park Mouldings over from London, and we met, and when my project was done, we became friends, and I started working with him, and I initially just thought I was going to help him with this business for a little while and then do something else. But then I really fell in love with it. In say under a year, I just kind of was really very much attached to the whole process, the craft aspect of what we do, and the fact that it could be It's a fun craft, and it's also a compelling business to be involved in if you do it right.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, that was in 1996, so I've basically been involved in this in one form or another ever since then.
And do you come from a visual art family?
Not so much the visual arts, the musical arts. My father was a musician, as was his father before him, and all of his brothers and sisters. And even on my mother's side of the family, there's some musicians over there too. And I grew up in a very artistic household, let's say. And so there's always music around, and you know, my mother was always doing batik or macrame or pottery or something. So when I first stepped into the studio environment over here at Hyde Park Mouldings, it wasn't entirely foreign to me at all. It was sort of like, oh, I know what's going on. This looks a lot like my mother's old pottery shop or something. So it was you know, it was not a difficult transition to put myself in the frame of mind to begin focusing on that. So
so here you are.
A long answer to a very short question.
No, because it's definitely, you know, it's a specific, very specific career. And
right. Well, and that's, you know, lo and behold, there's no, in the United States today, there's really no training for this sort of thing. Everyone basically learns on the job. I mean, there are very, very few vocational opportunities for people to learn this craft other than actually doing it. So and that's just not only in the United States, but worldwide at this point. So there's a bit of a part of the job at a certain point became advocacy and education, explaining to people that this actually still exists and it can be done.
Yeah, totally. When I take on a job, you are frequently my first call.
Well, thank you very much. That's a good sign.
Well, if it's particularly if it's decorating, obviously if it weren't decorating, I'd be working with an architect, and therefore I probably wouldn't be making that call, but I'd be thinking they'd be making that call. But when I'm doing, you know, a lot of my projects, for me, the grounding of the crown, the moldings, and the dignity of it really gets me. You know, it's almost like when an actor gets themselves into an accent. Like when I know what moldings and the scale and the grandeur of it, it can really set me on my path. So, which makes sense, in that it's you know, it's part of the structure.
Well, I love the way yourself and other designers that work like you sort of sketch out an initial concept of a room with, you know, some notion of what the moldings are going to be, and then that sort of facilitates the entire conversation.
Like getting your advice. Obviously, one of the benefits of you and Hyde Park Mouldings being, you know, everybody's so steeped in the history, is that, you know, it can be wrong. There are wrongs.
Absolutely.
It's fine to do them if you know that it's wrong and that you like it. Awesome. But when you're trying not to be wrong, it's like you really want the input of a team that can, you know, like, oh, this needs to be scaled up a little bit. This is really more proper. And for anybody who doesn't know this, of course, plaster, because it's inert, or gypsum, whatever we're going to call it, you know, and it's great. You put it in and that's not cracking. Like, it's going to be with you forever. The only thing that will screw it up, if it can even be screwed up, is just 100 coats of paint. You know, if it's painted over time a million times and it gets soapy looking, but otherwise, like, it's brilliant, because it gives you this immediate impact, and it's going to last forever. But what's the reason why everybody doesn't just go out and get plaster moldings is the application takes time, though it's totally worth it. Yeah.
Well, if you're looking for a job, we might have an opening for you, Alexa.
Good. You never know. What is your favorite architectural moment? Like, I know you're obviously very interested in the Brothers Adam. I know you've done stuff in the White House. You've done stuff, you know, anyone who's seen the Ralph Lauren store in New York City has seen tons of your work. you've done? I mean, give us some of the big bang highlights.
Oh, you mean in terms of projects we've done or just my personal preferences?
Both.
Oh, so it was funny actually. They sent me the questionnaire, and one of the questions was, "What's your dream interior?" or something. And I think I said in a house designed by Kirtland Cutter, and I can't remember. I said interior, but the period that interests me the most is, say, European interiors between, say, 1910 and 1930. So, Art Deco, a little, there was a bit of that Industrial Revolution had sort of very noticeably impacted what was being made for interiors and furniture at that point. And I thought it's a very inventive period. And I think it's a bit more restrained than some of the earlier periods in design, and I just love it. And I think that there's some real parallels between what was going on then and what's going on now in terms of the possibilities of ways of fabricating.
Right.
And we have all these new tools now, just very
When you
recently.
were in tech, what were you doing?
When I was back then,
Yeah.
it wasn't anything related to this. I was working for a company that made
No,
automated
but what
fingerprint
was
identification.
your role there?
Oh, I was a project manager, and then it was a French company, so I was also, frequently involved in communications, that sort of thing.
Because back to your building synthesizers in your free time, like finding old parts and building a synthesizer. I machine aginess of that period makes sense to me for you. I was wondering if you had been coding, just because all
Very,
that.
very minimal coding on that end. That was more way beyond my realm in terms of my abilities to code. Those are some serious algorithms we were dealing with.
Um, I don't know. I don't know, man. Do you get to do it a lot? Does Hyde Park get to?
No, and that's the thing. I mean, most of the period styles that we work in as a company tend to be, Georgian, um, pre-George. Sometimes some of the French periods, Louis 15 is a big one that is revisited frequently, and but some of the more contemporary interiors, in my mind, seem to be leaning toward some sort of inspiration from the Art Deco period,
Yeah.
and I'm excited about that. I think it's an interesting thing for designers today to be exploring, because it is very transitional, and it can work with any variety of furnishings that they may be putting in the room as well.
Yeah.
So,
Um, and what are the Hyde Park, the Big Bang moments? The
oh,
big,
for us,
yeah,
well, I mean, we're always working on something really fun. I mean, fortunately we're blessed to have really great clients that always have interesting projects, and a lot of them I'm probably not even allowed to talk about because we seem to constantly be under these very complicated non-disclosure agreements. But a few that I can mention right now that are very recent are we're just wrapping up a new ballroom at the Pierre Hotel in New York for Sawyer Burson,
yeah.
John and Brian, and Michael Smith is doing the decoration on that project. So that's been about a couple of years in the making, I think. But I think they're shortly going to open that, and it's a beautiful new space they've designed. The other big recent one in New York was we actually made a clock for the new Moynihan Train Hall at Penn Station, and that was an interesting project because it's the first clock we've ever made, and I think it may be the only clock ever made out of glass fiber reinforced gypsum. So it was a bit experimental. Peter Penoyer's firm designed that clock, and they had won a design competition, and it was installed. We did it. It was during COVID. We did this project, and then we installed it in December of 2020, just before the station opened.
Yeah.
So that was interesting. And then let's see what else is going on. We actually did a thing recently. We bought another company.
Yeah.
So we're very excited about this. This is a company out of Philadelphia that had been in existence for quite some time, called Felber Ornamental, and as a company, they had existed since at least 1939, and then they were formed from the remnants of another company that preceded them called Voight, which had a large studio starting in 1902. And so we're about to embark upon this process of accessioning their collection into our own, which is very exciting because that will, without a doubt, leave us with the largest functional collection of molds in North America. And also because they had been involved in a lot of very kind of important work at the White House and in some of the important buildings in Philadelphia, and even quite a few projects in New York as well. And it's just going to be a very interesting process. It's going to be a lot of work, but we're very excited about that.
Is everything in New York, or are you still going to have space in Philadelphia for manufacturing?
No, we're going to physically relocate all of the things to our shop here in New York because we have the space for it, and we can deal with categorizing and cleaning it up and everything like that more effectively here.
If somebody for Hyde Park Mouldings, could they?
Sorry?
If somebody watching this wanted to tour Hyde Park Mouldings, could they do that?
Oh, they could, yeah, sure. We do that all the time. We're about an hour outside of New York, and people do come out. And you know, I always tell people, don't wear your Sunday best because there's plaster being thrown about everywhere. But people like to come here and see what we're doing, and I think it's a good thing because so many people have never been exposed to our methods that once they see them, then it gives you a whole new range of ideas in terms of what's possible. Actually,
so what is the process? I mean, I have seen some of the process, like in France. I think I called you when I was working one job, and I walked in, and you know, I don't usually see it with hay, you know, hanging out of the plaster as they're creating it. So, right. What's the modern version of how it gets done?
Well, there's to tell you the truth, there's a lot of what we do is very, very similar to the way what you saw it being done in France. The most common way for us to fabricate is really using these very traditional methods where we are using natural fibers like sisal or burlap or jute as a reinforcing fiber with the gypsum. And then there on the more contemporary end of the spectrum, you have what's called glass fiber reinforced gypsum, GFRG. That's the phrase that the more contemporary architectural specifications have sort of latched onto. And it's very similar, except that you're using a modified gypsum and engineered glass fibers, which enable you to cast things. It's more volume oriented, so you can cast things more quickly, and it's a harder setting material.
Longer runs?
Not necessarily longer, but once you set up, it's being sprayed from a gun, and so like a spray gun, not a pistol. But you can, once you set up, you need to make multiple molds of the same thing and then spray them all at once. And it's so you really get the benefit of a volume of scale doing it that way.
So hold on a sec. So you pour it into the molds, you connect the molds in situ, you're saying, or in the shop?
No, we run the molds in the shop. We cast the molds in the shop, but there's instead of doing it the old-fashioned way, with these new methods, you can spray into the molds rather than doing it by hand. But for most of our residential projects, we still do everything by hand. And the modeling is still mostly in clay. Like actually, I could actually walk right now out of my office into the. Would you like me to do that?
If you don't mind, I'd love it.
Yeah, no, I think that might be interesting, actually. More interesting than looking at my face, for sure.
It's more interesting looking at your face.
Yeah, here, I'll come through this. I can walk into our modeling area right now, and I don't know if you can see what's going on in here, but we've got
I can see the
various pieces under, here. So this is all, like at this phase, these things are all clay. So these models are being carved by hand in clay. And then eventually, once they're done being carved, then we pour rubber molds on top of them and cast them in plaster.
Yeah.
And this is very similar to the way this type of work has been done for a long time. Here, Alex is over here working on a decorative.
Hi.
So this is sort of like a Louis XV period fire surround we're making here. And then we have, I don't know if you can see, like various sketches and things like that behind me that are just different projects we're working on. Here's a this Rousseau type of thing. Mm-hmm. Here. So yeah, there's always
great.
There's always quite a few things happening in the shop, in terms of different styles and different fabrication techniques.
I know when we were doing the rosettes for my master bedroom ceiling, there was a tiny little leaf detail at the very center, and it had a slightly arts and crafts feel, and so we changed it. And just knowing that you could change it like that was a revelation.
Well, that's the beauty of it. I mean, it's funny because in this world we live in today, where a lot of the design industry operates almost exclusively things that are predefined and are just sort of like thrown into a project from a catalog or something. We have the ability to literally create anything. So it presents some interesting possibilities all the time, you know, in terms of altering the character of the creating and decorating in general.
Do you see a time when 3D printers will be part of this?
Oh, it already very much is. We use printing already for a variety of things that you know, don't replace our traditional processes, but just help us speed them up a bit. So, I mean, we kind of view that as just another tool in our toolkit. If there's a way for us to say, well, it started with things that are motifs that are purely geometrical. Those are very easy to create using 3D printing technology. So, and now it's, you know, there are certain things like we can sculpt, say if we have here, like here's can you see that?
Beautiful, like, yeah.
Here's like a relief of a rose leaning to one side, but you know, something that we can do if if that rose needed to be replicated almost identically, but then lean it to the other side, you can scan this and then do that digitally and then print that out. So then it saves you time sculpting it. It's yet another tool. It's still not something that everyone is entirely comfortable using,
sure.
But more and more it is becoming more common. And I think in terms of us utilizing 3D technology as a means of retaining the ornament, a library of ornament, I think that's going to become a very important thing for us.
Yeah, as a cataloger.
Right.
I was, you know how you get those, I don't even know what you call them, things that you press against moldings to get the shape of them. So they have a very like molding ears. What do you call them?
Oh, like we call that a gauge. It's just it's a profile gauge.
So I can imagine, you know, any minute now you'll be able to just, if not already, scan it and then have it come in instead of having to touch it with the gauge.
Exactly. That's a possibility now. So, I mean, it's those types of things that really do make it saves an incredible amount of time compared to what you used to have to do. So, and it also is less intrusive. You know, if you're going into someone's home and you want to replicate their dining room cornice and put it in another room or something, it's not necessarily mandatory to mess up the room anymore. You know, you could conceivably go in and pretty effectively take a point scan of those elements and then proceed on that basis. Whereas we used to have to go and apply rubber, mobilize, protect everything. I mean, and we still have to do that in many cases, but there's these new possibilities that sort of change that dynamic quite a bit.
Way back when, and it is already not the case now, but way back when, looking at mantles when I was a young decorator, I was always told by my father, like, no, that's new. You can, because the carpet is too soapy. Like it's too, you could see the absence of the hand. They knew that no hand had touched it, that it was a machine.
Right.
And it must, I'm sure it will remain forever part of something to think about all the time, because it is so great. Technology is so wonderful in the way it's efficient, but there's that moment when it goes too far.
Yeah, see, that's the risk. I mean, you can use this technology in a way that will be of detriment to the finished product if you're not careful. And I think you see, I mean, we, of course, here at Hyde Park, we sort of have this notion that our clients will always expect a certain level of elegance and perfection. And so we don't allow certain things that, but I do see elsewhere in the industry, these things being abused and these sort of inferior products being turned out. So
And it's you can't even sometimes point to what it is that's wrong, but your eye
right,
definitely sees it. You can, just like I was talking to a colleague last week about how I so much more respond to hand-drawn furniture, even if it's using templates. Then
yeah, I mean,
add.
there is really something to the whole notion of something being produced from the imagination, first as a drawing, and then as a model, a physical model. It makes an immense difference, and it somehow, I think that the character and the spirit of the final object is imbued with the same sense that its creator originally conceived in their minds.
Yeah, it's really, there's like God in there. There's a divine something to creation.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Which brings
And
us a great
sorry.
segment to Scenographia, right?
Yes, I'm glad that you were aware of that. It's that's a project all about that, actually. It's I don't know if I mean, I guess
I've
you're
seen
aware of it, but for those of you who don't know, that what she's referring to is a project that I am involved in with my friends Matt McNicholas and Sarah Arancio. Matt's an architect out of Chicago, and a number of years ago I saw him doing one of these live drawing events at a conference, and I had made the comment to him that just the reaction of everyone at the conference was so powerful. And I said, this is something really important that other people need to see. And we got into a long conversation about it. And we came to the conclusion, like, okay, what we need to do is to conduct these live drawing events in very, very public places so that the average, not just architects and not just designers, but just the average person on the street who thinks that these skills are something of the past, to see that it's still a living possibility. And we started this organization called Scenographia for the purpose of conceiving of and producing these events. And we did a big one in 2018 in Chicago at the Mart, where we had 3 teams of draftspeople doing this over the course of 3 days. And we captured time-lapse photography of each one of the team's work. And it's on there's a website for it. You can look it up, scenographia.art. And it's very interesting, and it elicited many inquiries and a lot of interest. And then so we did a couple of events subsequent to that, and then COVID happened, and we've sort of been on hiatus for the past couple of years because of COVID and because it was just hard to get things going again. But now it's happening again, and we're reorganizing and are about to sort of reveal a whole new plan of events and things like that coming up. So it's very exciting.
Definitely, anyone listening to this, you have to go check this out, because I've seen that time lapse one. I saw it at the ICAA, and I feel like I was in Houston and was in and saw one in person, and it's like huge drawings that they're doing
Well,
in
yeah,
real.
well, that was part of that's part of the original idea, and part of the obstacle too to doing it the way we had originally conceived is that we were like, we have to do this on the largest scale we possibly can, and the idea was big murals in very public places like train stations or places like that. And the problem with doing that, of course, then becomes you have ancillary issues like security and safety, and how what do you do with this big mural after it's done, and how do you roll it up, and all of that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's I think it's I think that will definitely it's sort of already sprouted wings of its own as a project, and I think it's going to become something that will be of great interest to the design and architecture community in particular, but then also of interest to anyone who's interested in human creativity on any level. So yeah, that's
Really, it is mind-boggling. It is definitely worth looking at. So this advocacy work that you do, it's a huge part of your life. Just trying to spread the word and shine light on artisans and artists.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I mean, I have to say, it's not entirely, I do have some. I would like to encourage that sort of thing, because one of our biggest problems here at Hyde Park Mouldings, of course, is always finding new talent, and the fear is that at some point, if these skills are no longer taught, that they might be completely forgotten, and then what will we do? We won't have people to carve beautiful things or to draw things for us.
So how do you find your carvers? How do you find the people that are doing that?
Well,
like youngest person in the firm who does that.
Who's the youngest person?
Mm-hmm. How young?
Well, right now, I think the youngest is probably in the 30s realm.
Okay.
But we've had some very young people in the 20s in here. We've had older people. It sort of runs the gamut, and I guess they sort of find us at this point because let's face it, there's not very many places that someone with that skill set can go to find something interesting to do. So, we have a website. They'll find us. People show up from other countries and find us. We've actively looked for people in the past when we had, there's a certain point in time where we had something like 5 different really large projects, all requiring some very ornate, specific sculptural details. And so we had to augment our sculptural staff significantly during that time. But no, it's a concern because there really aren't any places, there's very few places in the world where people go to learn architecture. The sculpture of architectural ornament is a very specific thing. And there are lots of places you can go to learn sort of generalized figurative sculpture. Mm-hmm. But then most of the academic programs have sort of ceased to exist that addressed things like, how do we carve, what's the proper method for carving eggs and darts or an acanthus leaf?
Proper method.
But for that, you have to go to the Institute of Classical Architecture and Art and take a class. I'm not really the one to explain it on Instagram, but even in Europe now, there's very few training programs for this type of thing. Most of the people that know it have learned it working either as wood carvers or just out of interest, really. So it's one of those things where we're trying to sort of do things to plant seeds in the minds of young people as much as possible, that there is the possibility of working and doing something creative and fun in that realm. And to the extent where we created a little a number of years ago when the Institute of Classical Architecture and Art was starting out that program that they do called New Heights for young people. So I had already been doing this little exercise trying to show kids what the orders were. Yeah. And, and then it was just a natural fit. So we started doing that for them. And I mean, that seems to have been popular. And the kids always love it. And I think it does plant seeds, because at the end of it, they can take a piece of architecture home that they created. Mm-hmm. And hopefully that gets hung on a wall somewhere. And in 20 years, maybe they're thinking about what to do with the rest of their lives. Maybe they're going to go to college and study architecture. Yeah. Maybe they're going to show up at Hyde Park Mouldings and want to be a sculptor or something. So that's kind of my thinking regarding all of that.
And it's a way to sculpt and also have a job.
Right. It does exist. It's those opportunities. It's so funny because you see, the comment that I see time and time again is, especially on like realtors video blogs and things like that, they'll show some fantastic plaster ceiling somewhere, an old mainline Philadelphia home or something in the Upper East Side. And they go, you can't even get this type of work anymore. And I'm like, yes, you can. You can. So,
I obviously they are not motivated to spread that word.
Well, no, of course I understand. I mean, I get what they're doing, but it's just funny because the message is the work's it's still important work. As much as there's a whole segment of the architectural design community that really for decades did not want to address ornament or have anything to do with ornament at all, you find it creeping back in, even into contemporary design. And I mean, I think maybe the word ornament itself is sort of tinged with some stigma, because when you say ornament, you're thinking of wedding cake or whatnot. But it's really ornament does not have to be sculptural in nature. It's all about proportion and shadows. And there's a lot of beautiful things you can do in a very modern and sleek way
and it's really great for, again, this is like a little ad for Hyde Park Mouldings, but it is great for young designers who might not feel confident about what they know. They might not have all of the vocabulary or the experience. So you can still pick up the phone and call you guys and then collaborate.
Well, I mean, absolutely. And I find time and time again that this becomes maybe one of the most common and probably the most important things we help and we collaborate with these designers recently, because not a lot, I mean, there's a pretty good community of architects and designers that have come through these, like a handful of really good training programs at like Notre Dame or University of Miami or a Catholic university, where they're training people how to draft in high classical style. And that's wonderful, because when those people design projects, we know exactly what we're doing. But that's not the majority of designers in America today. The most common thing is they'll have a notion of a style that they want to evoke in a room. And I always say, look, don't necessarily worry about drawing it right away. Describe the room size and the height to us and those kinds of details, and then give us some images of what you are thinking, what sort of style you're aiming for. Yeah. And in that way, we can start to be helpful based on, based on the experiences we've had in the past, and based on, I have a reasonably useful collection of books that are helpful in those ways, and those things. So I think it's part of our role. Like as much as possible, we try to help that process along, because the design development phase of any project is so important. I think, especially for designers who are trying to present something to a client, if they can't accurately capture the mood and the sort of the flavor that they're trying to achieve early on, then they're not going to gain their client's trust. Yeah. So we try to help that along.
You and I have traveled places with your big bag full of tricks, bringing samples to job sites, and there's nothing, once you see it, once you're able to get on a ladder, as you do, and hold that immense crown up at the, it does it. You know, you don't even need to speak anymore. It makes it clear.
I mean, that's just it. If, you know, once people see it in position, you, you know, especially as the designer, you generally know right away, okay, this is successful or it's not.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with saying it's not, you know, but it's good to do that at a certain point early on so that you don't, you know, install a
Right.
whole suite of rooms with it and then decide it's not good.
So tell me about joining the board of landmarks.
Yes, very excited about this. I have, well, I mean, I'm 50, I'll be 52 in December. And I've been sort of looking for something more adult to to devote some time to, and it kind of culminated. I guess I'm gonna step back and tell you a little story. A few years ago, I can't remember exactly how many years, but I was in Manhattan, and there had been a big snowstorm, and I was supposed to meet my wife downtown for dinner with some friends, and traffic was closed down. You couldn't get a cab, and I was trying to get down there. I wound up walking from like East 67th down to like Gramercy Park or something. So it's quite a walk. And there was no traffic that day. And in the course of that walk, I had this epiphany that, first of all, oh my God, I've been in New York for more than half my life now. I guess I'm truly a New Yorker.
Yeah.
And point B, along that route, I saw so many buildings that I had been in, played some part in their beautification in one form or another. It was just this astounding moment for me. And I sort of realized then that I was, this is the city that I've chosen to make my livelihood in. And I've spent so much time working here. And then about a year ago, another friend who's on the board of Landmarks Conservancy had suggested that I join. And I thought, you know, that is probably a really, really good place because the work that they do is very interesting. I mean, as you know, of course, I don't need to tell you this. You're the queen of New York, basically.
A lot of people hear Landmarks Conservancy and they're like, "Oh, will you help me get a window installed in my apartment?" And I'm like, "It's not the preservation. It's not the LPC. It's
right."
the Conservancy."
But the work they do, I think, is just so important because there is such. I mean, New York City is probably, you know, definitely one of the oldest and most architecturally diverse cities in America, for sure. And there's so much interesting architecture that needs to be preserved. And at the same time, there's always this constant climate of you know, what's next? What's new? What's next? What can we develop that's going to make the city last into the future? And that's very important too. I mean, you wouldn't want to have New York City without that. But I feel like in the process of this rush to develop everything so quickly, it's easy to leave behind the notion that there are certain points and buildings and places in the city that contribute very integrally to its character and need to be preserved and protected. So the work that Landmarks does is very interesting, and it's just such a talented group of people. That Peg Breen over there, who's the president, is just a powerhouse. And yeah, that whole team.
So the Conservancy is not, you know, it's not a legislative body or anything. They're advocates, and
Yes.
they make themselves aware of what's happening, and they try to lobby or petition different bodies to preserve certain areas, to help, you know, to, as you said, conserve some of the character, but they're also concerned about things like, and something that I was very interested when I was on the board was Midtown East. And if all of those buildings become office buildings, then you've got to think about infrastructure. Like, how do you get people to the office buildings? Where are they eating? Where are they getting, you know, and also if all of these towers are going up in a single area in New York. Like, what about all the darkness on the street below? Like, there are huge issues. It's not like, oh, I want to keep that because it's got a pretty, facade, though we do want to keep that. But it's all of these things that you might not always be thinking about, or where's this whole industry? Like, if huge hotels get converted to office buildings, where are all those workers who worked at that hotel going to get jobs? I mean, it unspools a million different concerns. And the Conservancy is in addition to wanting to keep things beautiful, is also juggling all of these different. I mean, they had a great program called you got to help me. It's called Sacred
Spaces.
Sacred Spaces.
Yeah.
Where they go and they rehab churches and mosques and synagogues, or any place of worship, or help them figure out how to get a grant to build a new roof. And if it's been abandoned and it's dilapidated, or if it's no longer in the church and it's a beautiful building that needs help to stay there.
Yeah, and then and they go the extra mile and try to facilitate those things as much as possible, I believe, and
get them with artisans that can help restore them or revive them, like a Hyde Park molding, like a roofer, like a blazer. They are really, they have their hands in everything.
Yeah, it's a really interesting group, very talented people. So I'm very excited about getting involved with it, and yeah, I can feel more honored. So it's very interesting.
It's really perfect sense with, minus the synthesizer. Mine is, it's very you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I didn't realize that we had ever had the conversation about my deep interest in electronic music either. It's definitely remains my core hobby.
Because well, first I knew that you went one time to go buy those pieces and you were building. And I think maybe your son has also built a synthesizer.
He hasn't gotten to that point yet, but he's getting more and more interested. Yeah. I haven't actively lured him in, but it seems to be happening naturally. So
yeah, but no, I don't know what we were listening to or what we heard, and it sounded just like the beginning part of whatever.
Oh, don't go.
No, the Yaz song from Upstairs at Eric.
Yes, I know what you're talking about. It was sampled recently. I think they used it in another song or something. But
and I felt at the time like we were the only two people on earth who would ever, like I could have said that to anybody else and they would not have understood. And you're the only person who was like, I know exactly what you're talking about.
If I ever find a time machine, I'm going to set it to go back in time to 1982 and find you in London, and we're going to go dancing for sure.
What would that be? Human League, all of them.
Probably.
Okay, so by the way, just had a brainstorm. So
let's do it.
When you were talking about walking through snowy New York and seeing construction, and you know how when you're in Europe and they have the beautiful scrims that they put in front of construction?
Construction sites, yeah.
Why doesn't Scenographia get serious? No, they wouldn't be outside drawing, but they would do the drawings and then they'd be scanned. And you could have it could be like a pop-up facade. Instead of, even if it were the most modern building in the world, you could provide pop-up facades. So for a small period of time, that modern building construction site could look like a Venetian palazzo. And it would demonstrate the beauty of hand-drawn things.
I've always wondered why that isn't a more common thing here in the United States. I mean, it's an interesting idea. I suspect that there's probably a business that focuses just on this already, but
I haven't seen a good-looking construction scrim in America.
I'm sure we know a few people between the two of us that could probably
we'd have
run
to
with this idea.
talk to developers and it would make their construction sites the talk of the town, Adrian.
Absolutely. I like it.
I think it's a great idea. Yeah, give me what your hopes and dreams are, especially now that you have just taken over this huge company, or you're getting bigger and bigger all the time. What are your dreams for Hyde Park Mouldings in the next 10 years? Do you do 10-year plans?
Um,
Year plan?
yes. Well, I mean, our 10-year plan is a bit, dreamy, of course, but I tend to focus on smaller segments of years, like
Yeah.
5, that sort of thing. Um, where do we see ourselves in? Well, what I'm trying to do very actively at this point, since we've gained a certain level of notoriety in the realm of traditional and classical architecture, what I'm very actively involved in is trying to spread the word and educate all of the designers and architects that don't necessarily work as classicists.
You don't shooting fish in a barrel.
Well, the thing is that the interest is there. It's just that gypsum as a material for ornament is not necessarily something that a lot of these people have ever encountered in school or otherwise. I was literally just at a meeting in California last week, and the builder told me, we've never installed, we've never even worked with any kind of mold. Like, they're just so accustomed to working in purely rectilinear conditions that it just doesn't come about. So anyway, there are a lot of things that we can do to be helpful, even in that realm. The things that we do a lot of that you may not even be aware of, things like indirect lighting profiles that create sort of linear cavities above a ceiling that allow the light to sort of shine in. Things
so that the profile.
Yeah, and things like just plain reveals, and different ceiling shapes, different types of, more modern interpretations of things like vaults and domes, and there's a lot of that we can do that gypsum is the perfect material for, and it's a matter of reaching out to that community the same way we always have with our sort of traditional building community, and just informing them that we're here, we can work with you, we can be helpful, and there's a lot of problems that we can solve with this material that you may have never considered. So we, that's kind of big on my agenda right now.
Through its malleability?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things is that it's very easy for us to tool up and create a shape. It's very, by comparison to actually, say, like extruding a shape out of a metal or bending a metal, it's very easy for us to get to the point of actually fabricating something versus fabricating in some of those other materials. So, and those are very common materials in more contemporary projects. So it really, at this point, it's a matter of, just outreach and talking to as many designers as possible. So we're really hoping to be a sort of an authority on not only traditional plaster moldings, but the applications of cast gypsum in general. However it may be. I mean, we have a large manufacturing facility here, and we always have to keep everyone busy, and so the more things that we can add to the mix of what we offer, the better off we'll be. So, and then that in turn enables us to, maintain both this very traditional collection and ourselves as a resource for sculpture and all of that, and then also service the more contemporary side of the business as well.
What are some of the limitations of gypsum, not as like a don't use it, but like keep in mind, where shouldn't we be using it?
Well, that's becoming more and more of a gray area, actually, because with some of these new
Right, with the glass in it, it must change.
Yeah, some of these new techniques, we can actually make things for exterior application quite successfully, and we can even make certain things for sort of semi-wet areas now that we used to kind of avoid. But it's not, it's not a structural material. That's the main thing that people need to be aware of. So if if we're cladding a structural member, it's not the gypsum that's providing any sort of structure. It's a purely cosmetic treatment. So that's really the main thing. I mean, other than that, the material is very just fantastic in so many levels. It's, bugs don't like it. It doesn't burn. It doesn't expand and contract with changes in humidity. Those are just, it paints very well. It's a great substrate for painting and decorative finishes.
It had never occurred to me that it didn't burn.
Yeah, it's actually used as a fire protection material. Like when you see buildings under construction and they're spraying that weird gray fuzzy looking stuff on steel, that's actually gypsum.
Wow.
So it prevents the spread of fire, and that's why you say gypsum wallboard. A 5/8 sheet of gypsum wallboard is rated to, theoretically it's like 1 hour. If there's a fire burning in the room, it's going to take 1 hour to cause that board to degrade enough to actually, then the fire would get through. But that's an hour of being exposed to a 1200 degree flame. It's pretty incredible.
Somebody asked about the acoustics of gypsum. Hold on, I saw it a while ago.
Yeah, there's no inherent acoustic value. If you're talking about a cast,
like hard and shiny, so it still bounces sound around.
Right, it's going to reflect sound. A cast gypsum item is going to reflect sound. There are what's called there's a few systems in the marketplace which we do not take part in. They're sort of adjacent to our work, but there's what they call sound absorbing plaster systems. Those are generally not gypsum. They're generally like a hybrid of porous materials so that the sound goes in through a pore and is trapped in some kind of foam beyond, or something like that. But
that does not sound like a happy paintable surface. That sounds like a really bad paint job waiting to happen.
Yeah, well, I've seen clever ways of people painting those systems, but it's a bit tricky. It's a porous surface, and it's not intended to be painted with a traditional paint.
By the way, while we're on the phone, I want to show you what. Darn it! Sorry.
No.
Okay, I want to show you what I am looking at while talking to you.
I'm gonna.
How do I do this? Oh, here we go.
Oh, is there a way to do that?
Hold on. Yeah. Hold on. Sorry. Darn. Oh, there. Do you see the sheep?
That's incredible.
Isn't that a happy little...
Are you on the set of All Creatures Great and Small right now? Is that what's happening?
Yeah, that's me. I'm a creature. Creature. Okay, well, I have darkened your door long enough. Again, this is Adrian Taylor from Hyde Park Mouldings. Keep the U. It's not molding. Molding.
It's never going away. We're keeping the U.
And do you draft with a G and an H?
I do, but I always it's always the spell correct is always grabbing it and trying to correct it.
I think my computer has relented to the U in Mouldings because I have a very hard time not putting it in. That's probably your fault.
It's the first thing I do anymore is disable all of that on any device. Disable all of the spell correction because there's too many arcane terms floating around for it to be, an effective use of time.
Good point. Thank you. Thank you. So thank you so much, Hyde Park Mouldings. It's not a commercial. I just want to be clear that this is an amazing resource and it's one I rely on all the time. And it really does a space good.
Thank you so much, Alexa. I mean, I'm so honored that you asked me to do this, and I've been so nervous about it all week.
Really? To
I
talk?
wasn't really sure what to do, but it's. I hope this somehow this is helpful or interesting to somebody who's listening, and if
My
so,
mother will.
feel free to reach out.
If nobody else, Dwayne Hampton thanks you. Find this, and that's enough for me. Oh my
Okay,
gosh! Guess what? Guess what?
what?
You are the 100th Instagram Live of 52 weeks.
Really?
Yeah.
It's interesting. I think that we would also. This is also like the last one of the summer 2022, right?
Somebody told me recently that summer continues through.
Oh, really? Okay. I guess I have my date, my solstice
For me, they were
dates off.
hard stuff, but I hear you.
But oh well, that's an extreme honor. Number 100. Thank you, thank you. I'm doubly honored now. Amazing.
Well, I'm doubly honored, Adrian. Thank you.
Get home safely,
Thank
and
you.
I'll look forward to seeing you in person very soon.
Me too. You. Lots of love.
Talk to you soon.